Morning. So sorry for those of you who could not grit your teeth through the last video. Yeah, apparently the EC was right on the microphone on that. But if you're able to grit through it and watch it, thanks. It's a good video, and if you could manage, it's worth looking into what Project Veritas is doing, and getting their take on journalism and the ethics behind it. And there's an interesting conversation to be had there, but I'm not going to rehash that one here. Mainly I wanted to talk about today is I had a conversation such as it is on Facebook recently about student loans and just the economics of it, and I'm by no means an expert in economics, but I think few people really are, and even the purported experts on economics, it just the predictions they often make seem to not pan out the way they seem to think they will. So economics is certainly not a science by any means these days, and maybe AI and machine learning and things like that will refine the science of economics to a point where it is a little bit more predictive. But there are some kind of foundational principles that we do understand about economics if we bother to look. And so while this is not going to be a master class in the economics of student loans, I think it's worth examining, because the post that was made, and it's an important post, was basically the original poster was breaking down their home loan versus their student loans, and how both of them took 30 years to pay off. One was a home loan for $150,000-ish. The other one was a student loan for about $45,000, and interest and everything factored together, it ended up costing them about the same amount of money to obtain a loan for a house versus obtain a loan for student loans. And they're just things about how interest is factored daily rather than per payment period or whatever, however the loan is structured, and how even prepaying loans doesn't go against the principal, it just goes towards future payments and doesn't affect how the interest factors in. And somebody commenting on this original post was bemoaning the predatory or unethical nature of the loans, right? And my immediate reaction to this was, this is a perfect example of why, well-intentioned policy like federally subsidized loans and, government mandates around lending when it comes to college is a perfect example of the unintended consequences of public policy, and how things get sold based on the kind of feel-good title of whatever the policy was, but far too little care is taken to examine the possible consequences, unintended or not, of a particular policy. And so Ben Shapiro did a good video kind of on the basic economics of this, and so I'm not going to claim to have a whole lot of original thinking, but I think it's interesting in the context of this other post. Basically when you flood the market with cheap money and you push a lot of people into college for whatever reason, and I think in the last 60 years it went from like 5 to 7% of the population obtained a bachelor's level education to something more like 40%, and so you're flooding the market with vast amounts of money, and you're increasing the demand artificially, while not proportionally increasing the available supply. And so inevitably, supply and demand, okay, we're talking about basic economics, you're going to drive the price of college up, especially again, making capital easily obtainable for people who otherwise do not have credit, right? And then the key here is, regardless of their ability to repay the loan, regardless of the value of the degree being obtained, right? And so as this applied to the, kind of the lending scheme, I made this comment. It's like, hey, this is, a great example of, the kind of unintended consequences of feel-good policies. And further well-intentioned government action, like, maybe student loan forgiveness, is likely not going to have the intended effect, right? Or at least there will be some unintended consequences, which will inevitably negatively affect the, worst impacted people. So it's going to, probably disproportionately affect, like people of color, or whoever else is, most negatively impacted by the way we do, student loans for school now, right? And the person I was, making this comment to responded, somewhat, indignant, let's say. There's nothing to do with student loans. I mean, this is about predatory lending, and even if you increase the cost of a loan by $100,000 based on interest, that the schools don't see a dime of that. Yes, right? Like, so the lender is obtaining the interest, not the school, right? The school gets paid on the front end, right? But it has everything to do with rising costs of student loans and flooding the market with cheap capital, right? And I posed the question back, and I've yet to have a response. It's been a couple days now, so probably they've moved on. But right, like, again, and Ben Shapiro makes this post, like, do you put a deposit down for a student loan as opposed to like a car or a house? What collateral does the borrower have to offer the lender for their medieval poetry degree, right? Right? The government mandates that these loans are equally available to people regardless of the quality of the degree being obtained, and the borrower's ability to pay. So yes, of course the loans are structured differently, right? I mean, if you're going to require that people make these loans available, and it set artificial rules about how they're going to be subsidized, then of course they're going to have to be structured differently to incentivize anybody to loan money that it's highly dubious whether or not they're going to be able to repay, right? And I mean, it's basically a meme at this point, people with philosophy degrees, working at Starbucks, right? So the loan company, they're going to try and get as much of their money back on the front end through interest as possible, as opposed to a 30-year loan, which is, still you get raked over the coals, let's say, on interest on a home loan. But it is far worse on a student loan. But again, does the bank foreclose on your degree or repossess your degree like a car? No, right? Like, if you don't pay it back, you've still got the degree. There's nothing the lender can do to recoup that cost. As opposed to defaulting on a home loan, well, at least the bank still has a home, and they're gonna put up a house on foreclosure to try and recoup some of that cost. Or on an auto loan, whoever's holds the paper on that vehicle is going to come repossess it, right? Not so with a student loan. And again, this didn't used to be an issue when maybe only 5% of the population was going to obtain a college degree, and you could pay for it with a STEM or job, right? The risk to the lender was a lot lower when the sums were a lot smaller. But when you're having to borrow $50,000 to $100,000 to obtain a college education, because there's so much money in the system, then the lenders are taking that much of an increased risk, debt to income ratio. Again, on an 18-year-old who's going to college, who has zero credit, we're just, presuming they're going to have maybe somewhat increased income based upon them obtaining a degree of some sort, right? And it would be one thing, like, if, you're obtaining a STEM degree, right? Or some kind of like computer science, technology, engineering, right? Mathematics, something where it's a high demand field. If you go and obtain the degree, then you're, going to have, substantially increased income over somebody with just a high school diploma, right? And so a bank might be more willing to take a risk on somebody, even if, it was a $50,000 to $100,000 loan to go obtain that degree. But again, there's no, discrimination on the basis of what degree you're going to get. And people change their degrees all the time. They spend, 8, 12 years getting multiple degrees, and now that so many people have a bachelor's level degree, there's a big push for people to get master's level degree. And then the loans for those are, God, even worse. I mean, there's far less in the way of, scholarships and grants and assistance beyond just, again, federally subsidized loans, or whatever to go and get that master's degree, right? And so I'd imagine things continuing the way they are, policies being what they are, you're going to have an increasing number of people getting master's level certifications working at Starbucks, or some such. So, what do you do to fix that? And again, you can look back at, how things were previously. And then there's another YouTuber, Sticks, Hex and Hammer, and he would talk about some things that we could do to maybe address the issue. And first of all, these loans, they follow you forever, right? Like, you can't declare bankruptcy on them. There's no way you can get out of them. And again, it makes sense that that's the rule, especially if you're going to, tell lenders that they, have to make these available to everybody, regardless of what kind of degree you get, because again, they have no way to recoup the costs. But you could change that rule, and make it so that, people can say, hey, I need to restructure my debt. There's no way I'm ever going to be able to pay this off. Maybe we can negotiate a reduced payment or principal, and hit the reset button with a bankruptcy declaration, and that might be more helpful than just the government, saying we're gonna, nullify a bunch of debt, because it's not really gonna fix the problem, right? People are just gonna go take out more loans and do more of the same, and in a few years, the quantity of loan debt held by students will be, greater than or equal to what it is prior to loan debt forgiveness. Whatever you incentivize, you're going to get more of, right? So, I mean, we could change, the bankruptcy situation, or, we could change, the lender's ability to actually scrutinize who they're going to provide loans to. I think the bigger thing is we need to stop pushing everybody into college, right? I mean, again, we're flooding the market with, massive amounts of capital, and that's what's causing these, massive tuition increases, because it's, it's scarce commodity. And rather, restructure our education system towards, more specialized kind of trade-oriented stuff, where we need credentialed and trained people for the workforce. We don't need so many English majors or history majors or philosophy majors. I mean, like, why are we training so many when there's just a dearth of good paying jobs for people to do those things, and those people inevitably end up somewhere in the service industry, and maybe would be better served by getting, some sort of, associate level or community college level certification that would assist them in the career field that they're inevitably going to end up in. And the whole trades, structure of, apprenticeship and journeyman and, master level tradespeople, I think that's a more appropriate sort of framework to look at how maybe we foster, skilled people into the workforce. Not everybody has to be, a pipe fitter or a welder, but I mean, maybe we could, have, administrative, and clerical staff, kind of work into that same mold, to where you don't need a degree to get those, jobs that people are inevitably going to find themselves in anyway, right? And of course, colleges could do better about, trying to match people to work on their way out the door. But there's not really any incentive for them to do that right now, right? I mean, they just, they continue to, raise tuition rates and have these massive endowments and whatever else, and the supply side doesn't really change, right? And they just reap this windfall of government subsidized loans on the backs of all these students who have been promised a bill of goods by government and society, and have seen just the consequences of policy negatively affect them. At least that's kind of my thought process. But watch the video from Ben Shapiro. I'll put the link in the description, and tell me what you think. How would you address student loans? Do you think loan forgiveness makes sense? Do you hold student loans? Are you going to be subsidizing somebody who does have student loans and is going to have them forgiven? How do you feel about that? Let me know in the comments. Leave a comment below if you have any thoughts. Feel free to like the video. Share it with anybody you think that would be interested in getting involved in the conversation. Appreciate your time. Thanks for watching. Inspiring and uplifting as always. It's been fun. We'll see you on the next one.